The High River gun grab, what is that all about? Why does it matter? And how is it how is it a violation of fundamental civil liberties? Because this is something that really affected gun owners, but if you know the wider story, it affected more than gun owners. It affected just homeowners in the town of High River. What's it, 20, 30 minutes south of where we're sitting right now? Beautiful town. I say that, I haven't been back since the flood happened in June of 2013. But I've been there several times and I quite like it. So what happened? Well, if you're from Alberta, you lived through that same flooding. It hit Calgary, it hit many towns throughout the south, southern part of the province, but High River was particularly hard hit, and it was the reaction of the RCMP that turned it into a story that has gone on for more than a year and a half now. So I'm going to read a bit from the report of the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission of the RCMP. They say under their executive summary and background, they say on June 20th, 2013, unusual levels of rainfall resulted in the normally sedate Highwood River becoming a rampaging torrent that uprooted trees, submerged cars and homes in southern Alberta's town of High River. The extent of the flood and damage it caused were unprecedented. Over the next 7 days, countless acts of heroism and humanitarianism were witnessed from volunteers, firefighters, and first responders, including 380 Canadian Forces personnel and hundreds of local, provincial, and national Royal Canadian Mounted Police members, all working long hours to evacuate the town in search for and rescue hundreds of stranded residents. An estimated 600 people were rescued by helicopter and 200 were saved using boats, trucks, and farm vehicles. However, as the crisis wore on, the conduct of RCMP members was questioned as residents were informed that during the evacuation, their homes were forcibly entered, and in some cases, windows were broken, doors were kicked in, and firearms were taken. Now, if you're not a gun owner, why do you care about the Mounties kicking down someone else's door and taking their guns? Because if they can do that to a gun owner, they can do it to you and take whatever property they want from your home. That's why I always describe this as an issue of fundamental justice as opposed to just a gun issue. There were 1,900 doors kicked in High River. Not all of those homes had guns inside them. Not all of those homes had guns seized from them.
I often use the word forced entry, so more people got into there because when it was just, confiscation of guns, it didn't affect as much people. But it was a forced entry on 1,900 homes.
Yeah, and a good chunk of those homes, the majority, happened after the flooding was over. After the search and rescue period was done. So what were they doing? What were they thinking? They didn't have warrants to go into these homes. They said that they were relying on the Alberta Emergency Management Act, and that gave them permission to be in there. That also, they said, gave them permission to take the guns. Well, not so. So we learned about this a few days into the flood. I think it was the 25th or 26th of June. And we weren't the first media outlet to report on it. I'll give credit. I believe it was the Calgary Herald that broke it first, and the rest of us picked up on it from there. But what they were reporting on was just that some residents were upset that this was happening. They didn't necessarily or immediately view it as a breach of civil liberties. So that's where those of us at Sun News that took that issue seriously came in, started talking about it. The Prime Minister's office commented on it, and he was roundly criticized in the other media outlets for doing such. Because the Prime Minister's office issued a statement saying, if any firearms were taken, we expect they will be returned to their owners as soon as possible. We believe the RCMP should focus on more important tasks, such as protecting lives and private property. The PM was criticized for interfering in police work. Police work that was illegal, we put forward. Police work that was in violation of the Constitution and was ongoing. That was early on, long before they stopped kicking down doors, breaking windows, and seizing property. What was the reaction of the RCMP? Well, they got in touch with CBC, or CBC got in touch with them, and Corporal Darren Turnbull said, when RCMP officers were going door to door searching each residence for potential victims, we did come across a couple of residences where there were some firearms that were left insecure. In those situations, when they were out in plain view and they were not properly secured and stored, those firearms were taken by the RCMP member and safely secured in the High River detachment. It sounds reasonable, doesn't it? They were out there looking for Granny that couldn't get out, and maybe she needs her medication, and we have to go in and rescue her, and oh look, she left her gun lying out on the couch. No, that's not what was happening. It sounds good because it might give them an out if that's what were actually happening. But that is not what was actually happening. In too many instances, what the RCMP was doing was going on a search, a rampaging search through homes looking for things that they could take. They claim that, and still claim, that they took firearms that were in plain view. Plain view doctrine is that if let's say that I'm going down, I'm a police officer, I'm going down the street, I can see that in your backyard there's a crime going on. That's plain view. So although I don't have a warrant, or let's put it inside your home, you've got a giant picture window, and I can see through your giant picture window as I'm walking or driving down the street that there's a crime going on. Well, the police are obligated to intervene, and they can see that it's happening, and so they can then enter. When you're talking about police officers going in, lifting up sleeping bags, going through linen closets, overturning beds, rummaging through closets, none of those qualify as in plain view. Now, there were a number of people that put their firearms high and dry. So maybe they had a gun safe in their basement, and then they were leaving town because they knew the floodwaters were coming. They wanted to make sure that their valuable possessions, I mean, if you spent hundreds or thousands of dollars on your guns, you do not want them underwater. That's going to be expensive to repair or replace them, depending on the amount of damage done. So a lot of people took them upstairs, put them in a bedroom on the upper floor. They then left. Many of these did have trigger locks on them if the firearms in question required a trigger lock, so they were properly stored. They were in a home that was locked until the Mounties kicked down the door. So they were following proper protocol. But the RCMP, to them, it was a gun. They were going to take it. At one point, we actually had a Mountie tell us, because we had a tip that there was a guy who, his home wasn't in an area that was flooded, so the whole neighborhood was dry. There was no reason for the Mounties to go in, but they had gone in. And they'd seized guns that were in the basement, in a closet, behind boxes. And we described this scenario, and the RCMP said, yes, that could be considered in plain view if the officer happened to go into the home, into the basement, into the closet, and look behind the boxes. Then that would be plain view. Well, if that's plain view, then everything's plain view. If I went into your home, up to your bedroom, into your underwear drawer, rummaged around, and I found something, well, that's plain view. So we pushed hard on this and did stories every single day. And on July 5th, RCMP Commissioner Bob Paulson asked the Public Complaints Commission to initiate a review. The report finally came out on February 12th, 2015. It was the last story that I got to report on before Sun News went under. And after more than a year and a half, they came out and said, those of us questioning the actions of the RCMP were right. So if I was going to go out, at least I went out on a good note with Sun News, because we were proven right. From the executive summary again, Acting Commissioner Ian McPhail wrote, although the EMA, that's the Emergency Management Act, Although the EMA granted RCMP members the lawful authority for warrantless entries in furtherance of the Emergency Operations Center's emergency plans, these statutory powers did not authorize searches and seizures of firearms and contraband. RCMP Deputy Commissioner Dale McGowan indicated that for such seizures, RCMP members were relying on the Criminal Code. Section 489 of the Criminal Code authorizes warrantless seizures of unsecured firearms or contraband discovered in plain view. Furthermore, Section 489.1 of the Criminal Code requires that all items seized be reported to a justice. In a number of instances, RCMP members seized firearms that were properly secured or that were not in plain view. In these cases, firearms were not removed with lawful authority. Now that's bureaucratese. Let me translate that last sentence for you. The Mounties broke the law. They removed firearms, were not removed with lawful authority. They had no lawful authority to take those guns. Go back up and you'll see that they say, well, the Criminal Code allowed us to take ones that were in plain view. So the ones that were in plain view we're still good on, right? No. Because although Parliament has granted police this authority, they've added judicial oversight. They say in Section 489, if the police are going about their business, their lawful business, and they see something that they don't have a warrant to seize, and it's firearms or contraband, they can take it. But that's Section 489 of the Criminal Code. Section 489.1, I know that's way, way down in the page, and I guess the Mounties couldn't read that far. Section 489.1 says, you then must go and report what you've seized to a judge and document it. They didn't do that. Again, from the report. While RCMP members, acting on their own initiative and with little guidance, may have acted with public safety in mind, they nonetheless failed to comply with legal requirements concerning the seizure of firearms. Absent a warrant, RCMP members were obliged to report their seizures to a justice pursuant to Section 489.1 of the Criminal Code. The judicial oversight component of seizures cannot be overstated in the context of police officers taking personal property from a home. Cannot be overstated. Parliament has indicated its desire to regulate warrantless seizures of personal property in a manner that ensures police accountability, transparency, and judicial oversight. Had the RCMP reported their seizures to the court, it may have addressed many of the concerns and criticisms from residents, the media, and politicians. But they didn't do that. They did not report to a justice, and they are, for the most part, getting a free pass from the media. Just after the report came out, the Globe and Mail ran an editorial calling for the RCMP to get an apology from Prime Minister Stephen Harper for the comments that I read to you at the top, where he questioned what the RCMP were doing. The Globe and Mail, Canada's national newspaper of record, said Harper owes the Mounties an apology. Nothing was done wrong. They either didn't read the report or were willfully ignorant as they read the report. Why do I have the Globe and Mail at my doorstep here? When I come out to Western Canada, the only place I find the Globe and Mail is when I open my hotel room door and it's on the floor. I didn't think it was a concern out here. Am I wrong? Is it a big paper in Calgary, or?
No, it's for you, Toronto, when you visit.
Yeah, but I don't want it.
Feel at home.
I don't want it. I don't read it when I'm in Ottawa, and I don't want it here. Same when I go to Vancouver. It's like, why am I not getting the Province or the Sun? Why don't I get the Herald or the Sun here? Anyway, that was the view of the Globe and Mail. Now, other media outlets, while this was going on, they knew that it was happening, and the RCMP was giving daily updates. So you would think police breaking law, considering how most media view the police. Now, I have a high respect for police, but I'll call them out when they're doing something wrong. The other media outlets weren't asking questions about this. And someone said to me, Brian, why is this going on? I said, because they haven't found pot. As soon as they find out that there was a grow op seized, CBC will be asking questions. 2 days later, CBC asked questions about a grow op that was also busted, because there were several instances where police found pot plants or marijuana already processed and ready for sale. That's when the other media outlets asked about warrantless searches and seizures during the High River flooding. They didn't give a hoot about law-abiding gun owners having things seized for them. They cared about the pot dealers getting their stash stolen. And we talked a lot yesterday about Magna Carta in history in the Constitution. One of the things that I quoted throughout my coverage of the High River gun grab was an old quote from William Pitt. And so I was happy to see in the conclusion that Mr. McPhail had obviously been watching what I was saying, because it showed up there. Here's how he he summarized at the end of his report. He said, "In the end, what should have been a story about heroic actions of countless frontline responders, including many RCMP members, turned out to be something far different for the RCMP. The RCMP was evidently surprised and responded in a reactive manner to the anger of many High River residents over RCMP members having entered their homes and then seized firearms therefrom. Yet the community's reaction was somewhat predictable, given that the sanctity of one's home from state interference is a deeply rooted legal principle. This principle was outlined eloquently by British statesman William Pitt in a speech to the House of Commons in 1763. The poorest man may in his cottage bid defiance to all the forces of the crown. It may be frail, its roof may shake, the wind may blow through it, the storms may enter, the rain may enter, but the King of England cannot enter. All his forces dare not cross the threshold of the ruined tenement." End of quote. Various factors, McPhail went on, various factors identified in this report led to the negative outcome experienced by the RCMP, including a lack of leadership in terms of supervisory guidance and clear policy direction, as well as a failure to articulate and then communicate in a transparent and timely manner the reasons and legal justification for the RCMP actions. They didn't communicate very well. At first, they tried to deny, then they tried to claim it was just a couple of guns seized. You heard the quote that I read off earlier. We were in a few houses and this happened. No. There were hundreds and hundreds of firearms seized. I believe the final tally was just over 600. Am I right, Paul?
I thought it was 1,900.
No, 1,900 homes, but I believe it was over 600 or around 600 firearms taken. In addition, there was a ton of ammunition taken. Now, people got their guns back, but they didn't document the ammunition. So if they found a gun and they found a box of cartridges, a box of bullets next to it, well, they take that. And they were apparently writing down, well, I took a 308 hunting rifle from 123 Maple Street. They tag it. They did not always take care of them. Some guys got their guns back all banged up, rusted. One had rust all over it that wasn't there before. But they didn't do that with the ammunition. Now, ammunition, depending on what you're buying, can be cheap, but it's still your property. That was just destroyed. People didn't get their ammunition back. So they obfuscated, they lied, they broke the law. What's happened to them? So far, nothing. They've had a nasty report written about them, well, not even that nasty. They've had other media outlets cover for them. And right now, we're in an election year. And so, no politician's going to take on the Mounties just before an election. The opposition parties, the NDP and the Liberals, don't really give a hoot about gun owners, so they're not going to raise a stink about this. In fact, I have never heard a single question raised in Parliament by a member of the opposition asking the government what happened in one police officer described as the biggest abuse of police power he'd ever seen in 30 years. 30-year police veteran described this as the biggest abuse of police power. The progressive politicians don't care. The Conservatives are, given that they saw what happened to the Liberals back in 2005 with Sakardelli and various issues, they're probably just scared to bring it up or to push too hard on it. But nobody's been punished, nobody's been demoted, nobody's been charged. If I broke into any of your homes and took stuff without warrant, I would face criminal charges. At the least, the police should be facing some sort of disciplinary action. You cannot use a state of emergency to throw all law out the window. One of the things they found in the report was that several homes were entered numerous times. So there's a few things going on here. One, they said that given existing law and given an emergency situation, going into a home the first time in the middle of the flood period to look for a survivor is valid. That is understandable and acceptable. Seizing the property was not. But in many homes, they went back the second time or a third time to go through the home and seize the property. Each of those entries is without a warrant, and police have no lawful authority to be in there. So the entry and the seizure was illegal. They're not being held to account. Now, I said that you don't have to be a gun owner. I am not a gun owner. I've taken the course, should have my license by now, but I'm bad with paperwork. Just too busy for paperwork. So I'm sympathetic to the cause, but I'm not a gun owner, and yet this is an outrageous affront, and should be an outrageous affront to all Canadians. Unfortunately, we seem to have our rights apportioned to us by, people care about rights if it affects them. They don't care if it affects somebody else. And we have to be willing to stand up and say, no, it's wrong. If it's wrong, it's wrong. Now, I don't have a lot of sympathy for pot dealers, but guess what? I was speaking up for the pot dealers having their rights trampled as well in having their property, even if it is contraband, stolen illegally during the flood. The best that could happen to them is that they not get charged. There's no chance that the courts are going to order the property be given back to them in those instances, but they can't face charges. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see anything come out of this other than perhaps, and this is my fear, a new apparatus, a new set of rules that will allow this to happen in the future. Because if you read some of the recommendations of the report and the way the RCMP responded to it, that's what I see. That in the future, they will come out with a new process for dealing with this type of situation in an emergency. And rather than say you've got to stand by 800 years of legal tradition, they're going to say, we get a mulligan and we get to do this in the future. I think that's got to be stopped. So whether gun rights is an issue for you or not, this is the sort of thing that all of us, if we're worried about freedom, worried about the Constitution, need to pay attention to in the future.